Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening from all over the world. This is Dave from sunny Santa Barbara. Welcome, Rebecca. There are four of us at the moment, and we are proud if we are few.
Good morning.
And
Good
they're
morning,
coming.
California Dave.
Good morning. Good morning. Pardon the noise in the background. I'm just on my way into work, a few minutes away. Welcome, Gregory. Good to see you. Welcome, Pranav and Jess, refi Summit peeps. Nice to have you filling in this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Gregory.
I
How
had
are
to.
things on the maple farm?
Oh,
Give
things are
us.
good. Much to my chagrin, I had to re-download uh, the Twitter app onto my phone.
Oh, that's right.
It's
Sorry to
like
hear.
I was so proud of myself for deleting it to curb my Twitter addiction and spend more time out on the maple farm, and then I'm sucked back in. But I have a plan. I'm just going to delete the app after the news hour is done and then download it again. So people will forgive me if I'm, a couple minutes late habitually to Regenerati News Hour every Thursday.
Gregory, I appreciate the attempt at discipline around Twitter.
If I had
Not.
discipline, I wouldn't have the app off my phone.
Discipline is overrated, and you
It
just
is
gotta
so overrated.
you just gotta delete the app and don't have to rely on willpower or self-discipline to do it for you.
Well, unfortunately,
I
we were just
love that.
talking
Thank
about
you.
that. In order to Twitter space it up, you need the phone app, and so yeah, I guess it's delete and re-add every week is if that's the way. That's the way.
It'll be Gregory's grace period every week. It'll be great.
Right on. All right. Well, I'm gonna clam up here. Lots of great stuff to talk about today. The refi folks, and I think Christoph is going to be joining us from Carbon A List. Will from our side. So I'll hand it over and chime in only as needed. Rebecca and
I see Rex. I'm gonna get him up here to speak. Um, pretty excited about today's conversation. As always, we'll see where it goes. Emergent and swirling living edge of Regen Network. Maybe just to start, maybe we should just go around. I'd love to just do a sort of a quick good morning check in with you, Becca and Austin. Just what's on your mind? What are you seeing moving? And then we can kind of move into the different conversations here, which again I think are going to be refi summit, which is coming up, which is really exciting. And then, hopefully we'll be digging into maybe some of the work happening on the data module with RSI and some other topics that are emerging. I see
and
Christoph coming up too. So
I just want to point out too, in case Rex, you're out there invited you to speak, make sure you're on your mobile phone for anyone joining us up on stage.
Yeah,
Yes,
I can start.
thanks.
Or
Do
go
it,
ahead,
Austin.
Rebecca.
I was
Cool.
going to say after you. Do it.
Thanks. Thanks. Hi everyone. I'm Austin from the Regen Foundation. I'm happy to be here. Oh my gosh, there's so much moving in the space right now. It's incredible. I feel like we're gearing up for a really exciting, I don't know, summit that in Seattle that I'm super looking forward to, and kind of a lot of projects that people have been really hard working on finally kind of coming into the public space and being useful or testable and kind of being able to test drive some of this. So I feel like we're at this kind of critical moment and it's super exciting. Just from my end about today, I reached out to Will and Christoph to join us to kind of get into some of the weeds and the particulars about like what it really means to bridge between digital knowledge commons and like the larger sort of ecological management regenerative projects. Like the cyber physical divide is such an incredibly complex and interesting challenge, and I think that how people are exploring it on the Regen Network is like one of our biggest and most exciting research spaces. So I want to shine a light on it, and just chime in with questions and prompts as it comes up. So yeah, happy you all are tuning in. Happy to be here. Take it away, Rebecca.
just shining a light on all the things today, which I feel like if I'm being honest, it's like the cyber physical divide we're talking about both in like ecological data and knowledge, and also talking about in like getting people in a physical place together, like with the refi summit, like bringing things into a tangible space. And what's really moving for me right now is that I just got off a call with all of our science team, and we're talking about DSci, ReSci, like what that means for the region space, what's possible, what are the needs and blocks for the scientific community to engage and kind of throw off the chains of publishing and of funding and all of that. So I feel like it all really goes quite well together in my mind around when we're thinking about how to prove something, about how to create that cyber physical divide. So maybe I'll move to giving some space for these others to come and speak and share about their work, and what might be kind of on your minds. So because it's happening so soon, Rex, what about the refi summit? You
Thank you,
wanna
Sarah. Rebecca, sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I mean, so last year I started just learning about regenerative finance on Twitter, and it was so exciting. But I'm in Seattle, and I didn't know anybody. Haven't been in the refi space at all, so I figured the best thing to do would be to start a summit. Um, and then I was lucky enough, I found the Regen Network grants program, and we got the first grant, and that was what kicked it off. I was like, oh, I could actually like book a venue. And then it just started rolling down a hill from there, like snowball effect. Originally, we were planning on 50 people, and then we exceeded that, and we've doubled the size of the space. And then Jeff showed up to help us out, and we got a good amount of sponsors to help cover the food and other expenses that we have. So the goal is, I was hoping, with this event to create a space for you, everybody that's listening. It's like I want to try and get all these people together, all the scientists and refi innovators in the same time and place. And I wanted people to try and connect and build the relationships and meet each other. Like, because, the context is we're just ending COVID. And I think some of you may have gotten a chance to travel. I haven't. But I had this idea of like, well, there's all this innovation that happened the last 2 years during COVID, and people aren't aware of what it is, especially maybe from the traditional sustainability side. They don't know, they haven't been thinking about Web3, or their impression of Web3 is just Bitcoin and proof of work. So I was hoping to try and like create this merged event where we combine the existing sustainability professionals with the Web3 professionals, and try and create like a pivot point or like a catalyst where it's like they can compare notes and say, actually, this is viable. There's really good stuff happening here, and this solves real problems versus like the last 10 years they've just heard about Bitcoin, which solves some problems, but not the really big ones that folks in refi are working on. So the ticket's only $100. Would love everybody, if you're interested, to come join us from May 10th and 11th. We have room for 120. Would love to see everybody there. And if you have any questions, I guess let us know. And we're at Refi Summit on Twitter.
Just to tack on there. I'm really excited that to be there. I'll be there with a pretty sizable contingent of the R&D Inc. team, and Regen Foundation will be representing. And we're hoping also, and we've been juggling so many things, so apologies out there to folks, but we're hoping also that people who are interested in actively building, who are exploring these conversations like the one that we're going to be having today about bridging the cyber physical divide for regeneration, data management, data commons or co-ops, data sovereignty, how we're there's this amazing research space, right, that we're all engaging with and iterating around in the exploration of how to appropriately reweave ecological health and the value of ecosystems into our economy and our society and our decision making. Right, that's such a fun conversation that we have every week at Regenerati News Hour. But getting together in person at the venue that Rex is putting together, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rex, but I think there's going to be a lot of sort of unconferencey style engagement. This isn't a talking head sort of summit. This is a, hey, let's do some work together summit. So for folks who are interested in jamming, for folks who are in our community or would like to be, just really excited to put it out there to come and jam and join and connect with other scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs to figure this out together. So yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question to ask, Rex. Have there been folks that are coming that have surprised you? Like, is there anything in particular that you're excited about, either attendees or like kind of problems that you expect to be addressed?
I'm continually surprised because I was going to be happy to get 50. So yeah, I guess I've been surprised because I'd sort of felt last December that sustainability in Web3 would be a big deal. But then so we started organizing in December, and then in like January, in January, the articles came out about Klima DAO and Toucan Protocol in the Wall Street Journal. And at that point I was like, okay, I guess this is a thing. And then we ran into, it's just these folks from Protocol Labs. If you're not familiar, they do Filecoin, and I think their coin market cap is like 3 billion or something. I didn't realize they have a whole department dedicated towards like sustainability, and it's led by this guy, Dr. Alan Ransill, and he's located in Seattle. Like, I had no idea, and he just showed up out of nowhere, and turns out he runs their grants program too. So we just found these. Just a lot of this going on. And I think, and the other thing is, it seems like it's accelerated. Like, there's that announcement between Klima and Polygon. So I think it feels like we're on the right track, and it feels like the whole industry is moving to embrace this. So other surprise, I guess, like Moss.Earth and some of the things they're doing with the rainforests have been really cool. There's been so much, and the other thing is, like, I'd kind of started this under the impression that maybe the existing sustainability folks aren't doing much of blockchain, but that wasn't true. Like, UNICEF is doing stuff. Like, I'm talking to Dave Kim from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's already working on Web3. So it seems like it's already getting looked at by these people doing real sustainability work.
It's so awesome to hear. I feel like I can't wait to hear what comes of all of that. I feel like wishing everybody well, just all the good energy that comes from being in the same space. Having just been with a small group of my team out in California and getting to visit a regenerative ranch together, I feel like there's so much productivity, quote unquote, that you cannot put in a box. So I feel like that's going to be really awesome. And thinking about solving these real world problems and foregrounding use cases and making space for new innovations. Wanting to give some room for Christoph from Carbon A-List and Will from RSci and Cambium Validator to share about kind of their space in this Wild West. Christoph?
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Austin, for inviting me, and nice to be on here. I remember actually seeing Gregory for the first time. I was watching the live stream of DevCon 3 in Cancun and heard him talking about Regen Network. And at that time, I was watching with my co-founders at Nori, and we were like, wow, cool. We're not alone. And that's where we coined the term fellow traveler amongst ourselves, and kind of see this space as like, no one's going to get this right on their own. We're all fellow travelers. And I guess part of my story, like many people who maybe go through this, for lack of a better word, savior complex, to try to put their energy direct capital and attention to things that regenerate our planet. I've gone through like highs and lows to just be super cynical in many ways, and maybe would even push back on Rex's comment that we are on the right track and ask, are we? I think there's signal and noise in crypto, and it's really important to differentiate between that signal and noise. And so with my work at Carbon A List, I think we're constantly asking what is that signal? And I do believe there is one in Web3, but I also believe we're nowhere close and aren't even on the right track. And lately I've been thinking about, just to simplify it, it's like there's a system 1 and system 2. And system 2 includes things like carbon credits and payments for ecosystem services and other things. But if we start with system 2 before system 1, which I would say is like the fundamental capacity to learn and get there on holistic and hyper regionalized areas that understand the data they're collecting and really how it relates to the interventions they need to make. We might find ourselves too quickly in system 2 without really understanding what it's driving. So I was super impressed with Toucan and KlimaDAO and the speed at which they executed. And at the same time, I question a bunch of things like where are the improvement protocols to develop new standards that see more money go to the actual projects that are delivering on this work, and where's the ability for the community to innovate and build upon that? And like, how do you avoid rug pulls if you're tokenizing a new asset, where it's just those who spent enough time in blockchain to figure out how to capture value without really seeing a fundamental shift that we all would like to see occur? So we're grateful to be doing a piece of work funded by Regen Network that allows us to ask this question, designing quality assets. And it even begs, like, what is an asset? Is it something liquid that you can sell immediately, or is it an intangible value that helps you save money over time and kind of collect and drive other changes? And so, like many in the space, we did our own work, going out, looking at the landscape of kind of who's doing what and how do they do it, and seek to find the patterns across the board. And, we've settled currently and look forward. I don't want to put us on the spot, but let's say under 2 months, we'll have something out there. But currently have an interesting kind of continuum going from assets as a carbon piece and really looking at what is the monitoring, reporting, verification processes within that and the kind of qualitative and quantitative factors that make something quality, to things such as, and I just want a huge fanboy of this organization, Point Blue, and their Range C protocol, which also factors in as kind of MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, but isn't about creating a liquid asset, is about helping someone kind of where they're at most kind of best manage that land. So yeah, glad to be here. And I guess, yeah, I mean, I would just push for right track. To me means transparency, pricing, less silos, like interoperability, true open source, like big shout out to Open Team and what they're working on. But Open Team alone can't do it. Just yesterday, actually, I was talking to a company, Ovio. They blew me away, 6-person team. Like, they work on open source tech and do a lot of work with the UN. And it's like, I implore to the community, if we all just literally stopped for like a month, and looked at what was all around us, we'd see that the answers are all right there.
Thanks for that, Christoph. On so many levels about shares I feel like for the audience to explore some of the different folks that you mentioned, and a way to cue your what will come of these patterns that you've been exploring. And I think there's a lot to be said for letting those patterns speak for themselves, and what that continuum might reveal. So super excited to hear about that, and thanks for your honesty as usual is on point.
Maybe I can chime in like right
Please.
at that moment, because I think that's honesty and perspectives, Christoph, are super appreciated. Just thinking about the notion of quality, and how do we articulate it, how we describe what is the kind of space with which we would describe MRVs or credits to have quality. And in a highly, in an outcome-based approach, right? That it's a quantitative approach, and we're thinking about the integrity or the quality of the practices that we're upholding. I mean, I think that's like that's the long game. That's the long-termist approach, is to uphold and build systems for quality from the very beginning. And it's super exciting to hear how you're formulating that, and in particular that the land stewards, the communities in the different locations of different bioregions throughout the planet, that economic viability and that support for local communities, whatever the space of vulnerability they may or may not be in, who are doing regenerative practices, how is this process supporting and bringing capacity to viable economies in the bioregions, in the locations with which these practices are happening. And if we don't do that, then it's effectively repeating a similar trope that sort of environmentalist or conservation movement has been perpetuating. So to disregard the livelihood of economic health and well-being for the communities that are practicing regeneration is to not go forward in a way. And that to me, maybe not go forward is strong language, but it's like when you say quality, that comes up to me.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you like pointing that out specifically.
Well, I mean, again, I just want to say, like, these aren't our own thoughts. We're just trying to gather others' thoughts and push it out further. Yesterday, I didn't attend, but a colleague of mine attended the Integrity Council for the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, and they're creating core carbon principles that effectively are trying to determine what is a very old school way of, let's just call it, and it's not even Web 2. It's like old boys conference and cocktail party network, and you're only in the club if someone anoints you. And otherwise, it's really hard for your voice to be at that table. But, they're doing something quite similar. And I guess the difference, what I love about Web3, is I can just pull up the document we're saying and read off the list. It's got over 10 bullet points for both quantitative and qualitative metrics, and would love anyone's feedback on some of these points. So the first on quantitatively is, can you do statistical analysis? And there are many ways, for instance, if you're using soil stack and stratifying field samples under a certain method, can someone go and see that that's actually possible? And, can science improve based on that statistical analysis and seeing the curve over time and all the factors that kind of go into ultimately the quantification? Time and money and enrollment cost is another heuristic. And I think there's a lot in this space. We're trying to drive down costs in MRV, whether that's through remote sensing or other more efficient ways that take otherwise expensive verifiers a bit out of the equation, as well as middlemen, so that more money can go to that project. Market adoption is huge. Cool if it's an asset that's selling, a certain amount a year, but that amount actually, if it were twice or double or 10, 100 times, right? That's quality, because that's the way that the market signal says this standard counts. And then obviously the last quantitative metric is, how much is that asset worth? But what maybe is more interesting is qualitatively, because these, I think, open up really hairy discussions. And again, we just want to throw this out there so more people maybe think about what are creative ways to figure this out. But I mean, first is transparency, and I'll just leave it at that. Second is engagement. Does it de-silo? Are there improvement protocols? Is there community engagement, co-benefits, data protection, and enter data once, used many times?
Sounds like you've been open team pilled.
Can you tweet that? Can you publish that in the case that it's fair to share? Like, I'd love to circulate that.
Yeah, sure. I'll tweet it out. I'll figure out how to do that when I'm not talking, and link to this.
I'm pretty, just on that note, I'm pretty excited about the big, a couple of the big, shout out to Open Team, where we've been collaborating with Christoph and many others for years now on this sort of broader approach. And Will is up here on stage as well at our side. They've been a founding contributor as well. And I'm really excited about the grant application that the Open Team community is putting together for the USDA Climate Smart Commodities. And for those who don't know, just like bigger context, Open Team is a group doing open source agriculture data, agriculture science, monitoring, technology work together that includes leading research institutions, pretty big companies, small companies, data scientists. I mean, it's a really broad coalition. It's very exciting. And one of the cool things, I'm just super amped about the intersection with Regen Network and Open Team and some cool, like, this is sort of orthogonal to what Christoph is talking about, but also the work around how do we fund the most important research and development work fairly and with agility, because I think getting this reusable data architecture and the architecture right for claims, the architecture right for quantifying uncertainty and doing statistical analysis baked into an eco-credit marketplace. The heavy lifts for that, actually a lot of institutional players aren't immediately incentivized to invest in, because the current trust model in markets is really around maintaining your sort of like black box institutional trust and sort of like saving face and sort of defending, you're the one to give the certification, or you're the one to trust around, that this is what it says it is. And that incentive is institutional at the, university and research institution level. It's institutionalized at the corporate level and the market level. And actually, I would argue that that's the transformative revolution that is an application of Web3 to this particular marketplace, is stripping that away and saying, no, actually, we need an infrastructure that is based on the assumption that you don't trust, you verify, you audit. So we're creating an infrastructural approach in which each claim is auditable by any participant, and each participant has sort of like sovereignty and control over data and engagement, and that actually is sort of the prerequisites for a functional marketplace for regenerative assets, for assets that actually result in real world change. That without that, if we're just sourcing, in quotes, carbon offsets from institutions that sort of have incentives to just protect legacy approaches, actually we won't be getting capital to farmers. We won't be invested. So this sort of like transformation approach, just Open Team has been really foundational in kind of providing the support and incubation for that real problem to be worked on with the number of stakeholders, the number of fellow travelers that are needed, because it's not the type of problem that you just solve with a startup. It's the type of problem, it's an ecosystem-wide problem. So, really loving what you're saying, Christoph.
I mean, if I could just keep shilling on Open Team, one of the things that I love as they continue to get funding is if you lean in and are working on open source tech, that you can get funded to deliver a piece of it and a slice of it. And so it's a way to create the world's biggest company without any one player doing all the work.
Or an ecosystem of companies.
That's what I mean, right?
Regenerative enterprise ecosystem. Without a network approach, we sort of fall flat.
Yeah, and I mean, and the other thing you were saying, Gregory, that I just want to call out is all of that's what I bucket into system 1, where we need to focus our time. Without that, system 2 doesn't work.
Totally. I mean, that's why we've taken this like long winding and kind of like crazy counterintuitive approach at Regen Network, right? Where we're building this public infrastructure because, and why is that? Why would we take the longer, harder approach? I guess because we have the assumption that the natural capital markets, climate finance, carbon markets are already, we don't have to, those are going to be the most important markets of the 21st century, or we'll have societal collapse. You sort of choose one or the other. So we're assuming, right, that enough people see that's That's just where
I
things
don't
are
know.
headed.
I don't want
That's
to.
just where I'm just saying for myself, that's where things are headed.
I,
And I will argue. I'll argue with anybody who thinks that that's wrong, including you.
yeah, let's
Even
begin
though I
that
love you.
because I'd love to argue with you on that
But
point.
Yeah.
but
So
before you argue with me about it, let me finish. Let me finish what I'm saying, which is that if you take the assumption that that's where markets are going because they're going to be forced to, the next question is how do you ensure that those markets are meaningful, so that there isn't a subprime carbon bubble, so that there isn't so that the market isn't essentially fake, and because that's the real risk in my mind. The real risk isn't is there going to be a market or not. The mechanisms are starting to move that way. The capital's flowing that way. The real question is, will the assets represent real ecological health? Will the market be fair? Will it be sort of like self-governing to maintain its effectiveness in these public goods actually representing public goods? That's the primary question, and that's where I think, Christoph, where we're coming to the same conclusion, that the real work is at this sort of like deeper level, which is required for claims to be not only to be the best that they can be and the most efficient and effective that they can be, and continually evolving. And that's a sort of like network infrastructure level innovation, not sort of a single, like, hey, we have the single best carbon asset innovation.
So
Right.
I just want to inject. I've been organizing ecosystems for the last 15 years at Intel, ARM, and NVIDIA. Tomorrow's my last day at NVIDIA. I'm quitting to do Web3 full time next week. But I've been writing a book on the topic of what's changed in technology, and the book is called Orchards, Not Apples, because my theory is that as the importance of intangibles rises. So now in this era, upwards of 90% of the value of most corporations is in their intangibles, their brand, relationship, IP, algorithms, data. I believe that we're going to start seeing organizations that produce the ecosystem as their product. And it's their job to treat their ecosystem as their product. So I put together a 70-slide deck about this, and I'm looking for people to that I can show this to, because I think this is down the same. This is exactly what Greg is doing. He's building the ecosystem as the product of everybody, so that they can produce the quote unquote apples. The orchard is the ecosystem that produces the quote unquote apples, which is the startups and products that grow out of it. So would DM me if you're interested.
Love it. Can't wait. Definitely send it along. Christoph, what are you still? Am I still wrong?
No, I mean, look, what you articulated is my own story of being green pilled, and if everyone listening can save time in getting green pilled more quickly, that's a good thing. I think we disagree on assumptions and premises, and that's also a good thing. And, I think more clarity on what those are. If I could
Yeah.
just pitch what I would love to see happening is the creation of an asset that never sells in a carbon market and is kind of owned and accrues and appreciates value based on regeneration. And I don't
Yeah.
think enough people are talking about it because there's too much tail that wags the dog from system two. It's like, oh, this market signal over here that carbon markets are important. I guess for anyone interested, on Monday, come to a Twitter space I'm hosting that's featuring a startup that just came out of the stealth mode called 6C Index. And it'll be a safe space to kind of plug into how does this use case work. But also, what I love about it is they're creating a tokenized asset that allows people who want to pay for climate, for carbon, to not have to emit fossil fuels in the first place because they're not buying that way to pay it to sort of absolve their sins. And I think the more we can get to that level, the faster this transformation can be.
Totally. I agree with that. At some point, maybe offline, we'll have to dig into what we do or don't actually disagree about. Rebecca, what were you going to chime in with?
Yeah, I'm going to say I think that conversation sounds like it's going to continue in that next Twitter Spaces, and certainly worth exploring more. We should have just digging into assumptions conversation. I want to I want to flag that I feel like certain things that have been brought up have gotten some love from folks I recognize in the audience, like Thomas from Branch Out Now doing like Climate Wiki and Knowledge Commons work. So I feel like there are a lot of folks here that are definitely digging the conversation. I want to give Will Gardner, like I'm sure that you've got some thoughts to share, and I'm sure people would love to know more about your work and within our side, thinking about data, how it's stored, how it's used, how it helps people on the ground about their own management, but then how it can point them to different opportunities to utilize it. So I want to give you some space. And I see we've got some folks that want to ask questions. So after Will, we'll give you guys some room to share. So hold tight. Go ahead, Will.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I've definitely been having some thoughts as I've been listening, but just really enjoying hearing everybody jam and express their thoughts about the space. I mean, even just opening up this conversation, talking about you were talking about decentralized science, right? Which is a core value of our side, right? I mean, it's in our name. And just how can we democratize and lower the cost and lower the barrier to entry for performing science, because so many of these large questions are going to require that, right? We can't have this old model where there are gatekeepers. And I think too, I'm really excited by the approach that Open Team and Regen Network is taking in terms of opening up different methodologies and allowing everybody to have transparent data around these things. Some of the work that I'm doing with Cambium around the Regen grant that we received is developing best practices to try to store ecological data and represent that on chain, so that then attestations could be made and it can be used so that we can have these high quality ecological assets, which, that's this problem that we keep running into. And how do we enable high quality land stewards to be rewarded? So we're really excited by all the work that's going on in Open Team, and really glad that we can be a part of that. So happy to be a part of all this conversation and being able to build together to really make a big impact. And not get too caught up in these things. Thanks.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, I know that that Austin, and like when we had been talking about getting this crew together, we really were drawn in by this idea of proof of regeneration, and like how we're even approaching that. So wanting to kind of weave that story from on the ground to digitization. But Gregory, what you got?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was wanting to go as well, was just sort of maybe being able to tell folks the story of, like stepping back. I think one of the qualms I've had about using the term proof of regeneration, which now is starting to be used as many of the things that we were talking about, like way back in the day, is starting to be used around. You're starting to see it pop up in the refi space and the crypto Twitter space. One of the qualms I've always had is that, from my perspective, proof of regeneration will always be contextual and is like the intersection of ecosystem specific, like eco-social regeneration in a place with a set of people. And so it's actually sort of like, just like high level in the Regen world, Regen Network world, because Regen is also starting to be used all over the place by different people in different ways. Proof of regeneration is something we're trying to enable communities to define, instead of having sort of like a single proof of regeneration algorithm or something. So you sort of want to govern the process of generating proof of regeneration at the base layer of all of this. So that's just like headline for folks, because I think that's really important. And then what I was curious to hear you riff on a little bit, Will, and kind of dig in and take it some steps further, is sort of like a concrete example of what does it look like in this. We started the conversation cyber physical reality, what does it look like to be assembling a proof of regeneration claim? How is that being worked on? Austin, do you want to chime in and add some color or direction there too?
The color I'd add is, yeah, I'd love to like get into a kind of particular that y'all are working on. I'd love to hear more details about that, and definitely plus wanting the premise that there is not a universal proof. There's not a universal protocol for this, but in fact, maybe when we're saying proof of regeneration, what we're talking about is community stewarded protocols that are context specific, culturally specific, and that's where all of the really exciting and interesting nuance comes in. The diversity and pluralism of the network comes into play because it's the communities that are developing, stewarding, and maintaining these verifications, attestations of state of regeneration. And so just plus wanting the kind of community ownership of these processes. I think highlighting that as embedded in proof of regeneration is a really exciting prompt. But anyway, I'll pass it over to Will because I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Yeah. So this idea that, how do we move from the physical to this cyberspace, and like, what does it mean to have proof of regeneration, right? And I like where you're taking that, Austin, too. This idea of, similarly to Regen Network's approach being agnostic to specific methodologies, and anyone can develop their own eco-credit methodology. So that idea fostering the most innovation and collaboration. At our side, we work on flexible data collection, so enabling anyone to collect whatever data they need to build their own criterion for what regeneration or a certain practice is, and at the same time allowing that to be reproducible. So producing question set libraries. This is what Christoph was talking about when he says, collect data once, share many times. And this is what the collaboration in Open Team is all about. It's that we don't want to have to duplicate efforts, and we want to have interoperable data. We don't want to have these data silos where we're trapped because, John Deere makes a proprietary sensor, so you can determine, it's really amazing, but you can see this stream of data about how much corn is being pulled off, being collected when you harvest. But if they're the only ones who can access that data, where there are all these limitations. So looking at, we work with different farmer organizations, and we want to support these farmer data cooperatives. So they can, have their own sovereignty and choose the direction that they want to move. So if they value certain things, or they're interested in studying certain aspects of what they're doing, building out tooling so they can look at, okay, how is water being managed on this field? Or what fertilizers are we applying? What herbicides? What fungicides? Building out tooling so that we can reduce the cost to perform certain soil analyses. So we're developing low-cost hardware that's open source to perform these kinds of things. And then finding ways to aggregate that data and share data. We're working on this farmers coffee shop project. So people can choose to engage with how much information they'd like to share. So taking taking data and allowing it to be shared to move the state of the art forward altogether. So you can say, how is this farmer nearby able to achieve such a high quality product? And like, maybe if I share some of my practices with them, they'll share some practices with me. And so we're all better off, like moving away from these rivalrous situations to more collaborative situations. We've been working on Soil Stack, which Christoph mentioned too, which is an attempt at reducing the cost to perform these carbon stock estimates in the field. So we're collaborating with some different projects like the Ecosystem Services Marketplace Consortium, and looking to work more with farmer cooperatives as well to lower the barrier to know how much carbon is in a field accurately, model it accurately, while still keeping the cost down and enabling them to be rewarded for actual regeneration that's happening. So I don't know, that's a lot, but yeah, it's really exciting work.
Yeah, I would say exciting. It's an understatement. The field scientist in me is really excited about well, all of it, but particularly the last piece. But I feel like it starts to beg the question, and one that I've actually been having with Ned, our remote sensing specialist, about the relationship between soil organic carbon and regeneration, and how we're defining, how we attempt to define it, who should be defining regeneration. And it certainly touches on a lot of what we've already dug into, even within this chat. Who's making the decisions and the definitions. I want to leave a minute here for, we've got two folks in the audience that I believe want to hop up and ask some questions. So I've got Guy coming up here first. You've got the floor. Ask away. Loud and clear, Guy. Is that you? Are you
Yeah,
coming
absolutely. Thanks so much. This is
Awesome.
fantastic. Starting off with a question of curiosity in a group like this leads you down a bit of a rabbit hole of thought processes, but I know in the end my question still stands. I just want to say that, continuously feeling a sense of gratitude for the knowledge that gets together in this space every week. It's truly inspirational. And I'm hearing some really interesting thoughts right now about this idea of proof of regeneration, that concept of possibly even eco-social regeneration. I look at this almost from a lens of two-eyed seeing in a more traditional Indigenous way with the work that I do. And talking about that as it relates to biomimicry and a question of intent. And I'm hearing, the ideal goal here is to remove negative intent from something holistically healthy. So if I were to propose that the Regen Network in and of itself is not actually pinned to the carbon market, but rather doing a little bit of what I know Will and Christoph, you've both touched on this in one way or the other, having something that, where you're not buying into the idea of getting carbon to absolve yourself of sins. I like that idea. Instead, what you're doing is the end product itself is that there is something better coming out of it. And if it happens to be fiat that you're getting for that, or it happens to be some form of recognition of dollars or some way of feeding your family beyond what you do on the land, then that's good. I think what I'm struggling with and where my original question came in is with regards to this concept of social credit that we're seeing a lot, where companies might not get money for insurance or from a bank because they don't have the proper ecological plan going forward. When you look at how that's playing out versus the SDGs from our global organizations beyond the World Economic Forum, are we going to judge why that's happening if the end result is a healthier planet? And I kind of look at mycelium networks. If I take mycelium and I grow a superbug on it and it's horrible, the mycelium itself is never the problem. It's those that are interoperating with it. So what are the safeguards that we can put in place with the network now to maintain that open source data integrity, to maintain that open source free market principle that is so powerful within all of this?
It's a great question. I think kind of my answer to that would be we really need to emphasize participation and pluralism as founding and foundational principles. The work that Regen Foundation does, for instance, in endowing land stewards, indigenous people, even landscapes themselves as community staking DAOs, is a pretty radically different approach to securing a proof of stake network, to partially securing a proof of stake network. So there's really I guess when you get into the game theory beneath this question, how do we try to architect the network so that it sort of capture proof as much as possible? I think, one of the big ways we've tried to do that is by endowing in small communities. Now that there are certainly challenges to that, right? Or small communities, maybe not the right umbrella term, but endowing participants who are culturally rooted in the core processes that are required for this whole system to work, not just sort of having a network that's purely financialized and governed by financial interest, but also having financial interest and financial governance. It's like there's a hybrid that takes place, which allows us to try to bridge this sort of like the living capital and the financial capital, the sort of openness and freedom with kind of ordering and accountability around ecological health and other things that we know are very important. So that's my sort of like, I think it's a big question. And I think, you know, the ultimate way is culture trumps everything. So I think you're really astutely noting that Regen Network, for instance, isn't really about the carbon market. We're supporting carbon assets because there's demand and because that's a really great way to be asking these questions about how do we create the right system to verify these. What should this asset even look like? I really resonate with Christoph. These assets shouldn't probably really look like the carbon offsets that are currently in the market, but that's a place to start and build community and evolve, right? That's not success, that's sort of survival, I guess. So if we do a good job at building a culture, I believe, where this kind of inquiry and this sort of level of engagement, if we do a good job of, you know, detailed forum discussions about, you know, approaches and bringing those to governance, if this is the expectation that we have in setting the culture of Regen Network up, I think that also goes a really long way towards avoiding this simply being captured, because that's ultimately, as Rex was talking about, in terms of like, it's the orchard, not the apples. That's the way that an ecosystem is born and thrives, instead of just getting singly focused on that like single outcome. So I mean, that's my hope. That's my hand wavy way to answer a very good question. I don't know if other folks have their own answers.
Maybe I could just, because I think about this a lot from the Regen Foundation perspective of things, and I think it's an incredibly interesting question, a really important question. And Greg, yeah, I resonate with like everything you said. I think the way in which you can, I think that like time, and if I can say temporality, how that plays out in this is a really big question. Like you have to understand that there are pressures and momentum and velocities within a network or within a market that are clearly, you know, designed to incentivize and to reward short-termism in a way. And how do you play the long game concurrently with that and make it viable, and ask hard questions and build a framework with which it supports and nurtures culture, which evolves over time. And just the same way the ecosystems, you know, don't work on like quarterly cycles. Developing systems and instruments in place where we can be thinking in kind of ecological regenerative time concurrently to market-based time, but be aware that there's multiple kind of conflicting temporalities happening at the same time. And yeah, long-termism is underrated and really hard to make viable, but it's extremely urgent, paradoxically. So that's maybe a start to what I think is a really juicy question, and I'd love to explore further sometime.
I'm thinking this two-eyed seeing that you brought up, Guy. I feel like it really encapsulates a lot of these dichotomies that are playing out, and that fact that it's an indigenous way of approaching those dichotomies. I feel like I want to keep that in the front of my brain. I also want to give some space. I believe Matthew is up and wanting to let him have a moment to either respond to the conversation or have another follow-up before we start wrapping.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for hosting us and co-hosting, and thanks for everybody that's joined and listening. I loved hearing all the scientific things going on. So I was just running because my battery was getting low. Then I got rugged and I got back on. So I'm catching my breath a little bit. I just got off a call with Dr. Foley, the executive director of Project Drawdown, who's not very eco-friendly. I mean, not very friendly towards crypto, because he thinks crypto is blockchain. At least my
He thinks crypto's Bitcoin.
Yes, and
Yeah.
he's older school like me, but I'm into crypto for over 4 years. I've studied for 9,000 hours. I've been big into refi, following a lot of you guys. I follow everybody in the room right now, and I've been an environmentalist for 30 years and full time for 22 years, self funded. He has agreed to do um, a Zoom call. So I would like to invite some of you heavy hitters in the refi movement to come in. One, he'll update us on what Project Drawdown is doing, and they're hiring 5 or 6 more PhDs who are good at communication. Because I asked, well, can they communicate as well? And he's like, yes. Um, and my goal is to bridge the older generations and the more scientific people who are not crypto aware. And we know that most people are not crypto aware, and most people are not refi aware. They don't even know what refi is for the most part. So, I'd like to get some of the leaders of the protocols, of the networks, of, Regen, Toucan protocol, whatever, to one, listen to him for like the first half hour in a Zoom, and then the second half hour would be some of us, and we could agree who would speak and for how long. We could, like, Regen could talk for 3 minutes on what they're doing, or somebody could talk about. I mean, out of the 9,000 projects, I have no idea how many of them are proof of stake and low energy, but for him to really think that Bitcoin is a massive problem, it's like, look, Bitcoin was created because of the financial meltdown and the fraud and the lack of transparency and the control by the elites. And that's why it was created. And look what's happened. All these low energy like Polygon and Telos and stuff like that. ETH will hopefully in the next 4 or 5 months go to 99% less energy with their ETH2. We'll see what happens with that. So if any of you would like to be a part of a private Zoom just for leaders in the refi movement, especially you scientific ones who can really talk about measuring carbon and farms and stuff like that, reach out, DM me, whatever, and we'll give him a couple weeks notice, whatever, and we'll find a time that can work for all of us. And we actually could probably get him on a space at the second time, because I really feel that it would do a great service to humanity, because if he can get it, if he can understand how amazing you guys are and what you're working on, if he buys into it, then he can sell it to his network and start promoting the best ones. And I said, look, Dr. Foley, out of the 19,000 projects, I know nothing about most of them. I focus on probably 40 or less of these tokens and coins and networks and protocols and stuff. And I can tell you the youth, for me, are leading the way. Yes, there's some older people like me in here and older than me in here, but usually it's about the 20 to 35-year-olds that I hear in a lot of the spaces. And we're marrying the NFT artists to do all this stuff. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. So if you would like to be a part of a conversation with Dr. Foley and Project Drawdown, learn about what they're doing, how we can work together, and then us share what we're doing, and kind of hope to prove to him that, yeah, we're working with proof of stake, low energy. We are doing scientific stuff to draw down and to capture and to measure and stuff like that. He will love. And he was Austin was speaking good. Will was speaking good.
Yeah. Thanks. This is awesome. Awesome invitation. I'm reluctantly open to getting on that call. Dr. Foley and I have a bit of a history. I actually did some scientific review for Drawdown's first and second reports. Know a bunch of the people on the team there. Pretty disappointed with Dr. Foley's leadership and opinions, but I will agree not to give up on him.
Well,
and have
because to me
and
it's
have
important because
an actual
yes.
conversation. I'm not convinced he's capable of actually having a conversation, but I'm open to it.
Well, I just
and I appreciate you building the bridge. It's a noble thing.
Yeah, and I've had 3 one-on-one Zooms with him in the last like 9 months, in one group Zoom with him and a couple other people. So I know it's kind of a tough nut to crack, and I know some internal things that just happened that he didn't want to talk about, and I didn't want to talk about. But one of his people reached out to me, who's no longer with him, so I know some things that I can't say. So I do want to protect that integrity, but I can't give up on him yet because he is working with PhDs and scientists, and he's connected to the old traditional people in markets and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that we get some leaders, and so maybe you're not the best choice, Gregory, but if you have a history, but
well, the history is just actually having an honest conversation with him and him being unable to have a real conversation back. I mean, maybe I'm not the best, although I sort of feel like we're in terms of actually in terms of actually interfacing with drawdown. Regen was built to do ecological claims and scientific analysis, right? So the
Right.
that's the whole thing is scientific peer review, ecological data underpinning claims to actually bring market integrity into the as a foundational building block. And I think unfortunately, Jonathan mostly wanted to talk about Bitcoin, at least in the past.
Well, yeah,
And
I've seen him tweet about that. That's why I've been trying to broach the subject with him to let him realize that proof of stake and like Polygon, Telos Telos uses less energy than a MasterCard Visa transaction. So you can't disparage them without, because he's using a MasterCard or Visa, I'm sure, or a debit card. So,
well, any of the proof of stake based consensus are pretty energy efficient. It's pretty.
right.
So anyway, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, happy to jam with you, and if we can support putting people into the room that will help him understand the larger context, yeah, happy to try to
That would
build
be great.
bridges
Yeah.
there.
So, yeah, anybody else interested, just go ahead, DM me, follow me, whatever. And we could actually maybe even do an organizational meeting between us. How do we want to approach this? What do we want to present? Who wants to present? Timeframes. So it's very regimented. We know what we're going to do. And we have, because I've heard some amazing people just in this last hour, and I've heard many of you before. So, yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm not going to give up on him yet. And we'll just see what we can do. So I'll go back to listening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it and taking the lead and for the invite. I want to round this out with a huge thank you to Rex, to Will, to Christoph, to Austin, just showing up and creating space to have these conversations. I'm left with the word concrete in my mind around like concrete examples, this concrete moment that we're in, meeting people in person, doing real meaningful work at this moment, testing assumptions and having the conversation. So thank you to all. Final words, Austin.
It's exciting. Shout out to all the friends and people who are doing all the different awesome regenerative practices from many different vantage points and perspectives who are in the room right now. I see all of you. Thanks for showing up and participating in the conversation. I got to hop. Can't wait till next week. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.